I'd like to thank Andrea Dove and Amy Vogelsang from our law firm who have put an immense amount of effort into this, as well as Sandy Lake and Emily Butler from the Center of Innovation for Logistics. They are the four people that allowed us all to be here today and share these ideas. So I want to give a round of applause to them as well. Thank you. Now let's get started. Sitting at one of the front tables is Hunter Hall. He's a field representative for Congressman Buddy Carter. Representative Carter could not be here today, as you might imagine there's a lot going on in D.C. right now. But we're happy to have Hunter here on his behalf. We do, however, have a message from Representative Carter. And at this time, I ask you to turn your attention to one of the screens to hear that message.
I'm Congressman Buddy Carter. I wish I could join y'all today in Savannah, but unfortunately I have to be in Washington, D.C. this week for votes. While I wish I could deliver this message in person, I want to share a few updates from Washington that are important for our area and for many of you. First, we're continuing to work hard on funding and pushing forward the Savannah Harbor Expansion Project. I recently led the entire Georgia congressional delegation on a letter sent to the House Appropriations Committee urging them to support funding for this critical project. I've had continued conversations with the Army Corps of Engineers, Trump administration officials, and fellow members of Congress to reiterate the importance of this project and request the funding needed to keep it on track. I'll continue these conversations and requests throughout the budget process until SHEP receives what it needs. We have the support of the entire congressional delegation from Georgia, and I won't give up on my efforts to see this project with a 7.3 to 1 benefit to cost ratio upon completion become a reality. Next, Congress is working to address infrastructure. This important issue is still in the process of discussion and development. Regarding infrastructure, President Trump released a plan that heavily focused on private sector participation in order to leverage federal dollars for significantly more private dollars. Congress is working to develop our own plans that reflect private sector involvement, but will also look at the other priorities of infrastructure, such as waterside infrastructure and broadband development. Finally, Congress is working to roll back burdensome regulations. Recently, the EPA and the Trump administration took action to begin rolling back the Waters of the U.S. rule, a regulation that was incredibly burdensome for communities across the country. Here in coastal Georgia, I noticed a significant uptick in core interpretations and other complications once it was instituted. By rolling this back, hopefully we'll see more regulatory certainty that will help to drive growth and create jobs. Whether it's environmental or labor regulations, we're working hard with the new administration to cut the bureaucratic red tape and get the government out of the way of our job creators. Again, I wish I could be with y'all today. Thank you for inviting me. Enjoy the lunch, and I look forward to seeing all of y'all soon.
Thank you to Representative Carter for taking the time to record that video, and thank you, Hunter, for coordinating that and being here today. Now I'd like to introduce Rob Dillon. Rob is the Southeastern Development Manager for Champion Logistics Group. He's the chairman of the 2018 Georgia Logistics Summit Executive Committee, and he's going to give a brief recap of this year's summit that occurred in Atlanta. Please join me in welcoming Rob.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, or good afternoon, technically, if it is. Good to see everyone here. I must say, I feel as though I'm seeing the same growth here at the Savannah Logistics Lunch that we saw at the Georgia Logistics Summit this year. Unbelievably different audience and environment that we're standing in today versus the last couple of years. So kudos to all of you for joining us and to the folks who put the infrastructure in place that were already mentioned. So. I'm curious, who here attended the Georgia Logistics Summit this year? Anyone, hopefully? Great, great. So of those people, who actually made a new connection or learned something or did something that could help them grow their business? A lot of you, most of you? Good. I mean, that's our main goal, so we'll keep working towards that. 2017 was another huge step for the Georgia Logistics Summit. It is the premier and really the only state-sponsored logistics event in the country. And I think the state of Georgia and this audience should be very proud of that. But next year is actually going to be our 10th anniversary, and it's going to be even bigger and better.
But before I talk about that, a couple highlights from 2017. Excuse me. So first of all, the speakers and the talent that we were able to bring in to this year's event, to the sessions, was unprecedented talent. We kicked it off with Pete Minto, who is an internationally recognized subject matter expert as well as stand-up comedian. So those of you who are at the event are familiar with what I'm speaking of. But one thing I was particularly proud of is we had our first female keynote speaker in Sandra McQuillan, who is the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Kimberly-Clark. An outstanding presentation, and I think an important statement about the workforce and the logistics environment moving forward. Of course, there are a lot of topics of note, specifically technology being a disruptor was one of them, and we're fortunate to hear from some great people today about that topic. Another thing I wanted just to mention of a topic is just the workforce challenges as we look to maintain the workforce for the future. And I just wanted to give a little kudos to the state of Georgia for the efforts that's being made to educate literally at the elementary level on up the future of our workforce and helping them to understand the opportunity that is logistics and how valuable and exciting and compelling a career it can be because it's going to help all of us as we grow our careers and as the state of Georgia grows itself. But the biggest takeaway by far is just how prepared Georgia is infrastructurally in logistics to grow for the future. And we're going to hear a lot about that today, as you might expect with our speakers and the person I'm about to introduce. But 2018, as I mentioned, is going to be even more exciting. It is our 10th anniversary. We will be co-located again this year with Modex, but we're also going to be featured with the TLA show, which is the Transportation and Logistics of America show. It's their first show here, and they specifically chose Georgia as the location for this premier event because of the infrastructure and because of the leadership that I've talked about and we've heard about already with the state of Georgia. So just a few hours, 4 hours up the road or so, a little quicker, some of us got here this morning, but you will be seeing the largest gathering of logistics representatives from the world in Atlanta for the first time ever. And I think it's important to note that Savannah is a very key part of that. And so you're wondering maybe, why is the Georgia Logistics Summit so successful? It's really pretty simple. It's the foresight and leadership of folks like Governor Nathan Deal and the Georgia Center of Economic Development. Their foresight, their initiative, and putting the infrastructure in place that really drives business growth and corporations wanting to come to the state of Georgia is a really key factor in all of these opportunities. So it's going to be my pleasure now to introduce Mr. Burt Brantley, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Georgia Department of Economic Development. He was appointed in 2017 in January by Governor Nathan Deal. He manages the daily operations of the department. He's assisting the commissioner in executing the long-term strategy. He's managing legislative priorities. He's the executive director of Georgia Allies. But I think what's interesting to me when I was getting to know him a little more and preparing for today is he's worked with the State Road and Tollway Authority and with the Georgia Department of Transportation. So he's uniquely qualified to speak to us today about why Georgia is so well prepared for the future and what our strategy and vision is to accomplish those goals in the future. So it's my pleasure now to please introduce Mr. Burt Brantley.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Really appreciate that. And Brad, thank you to Hunter McLean for being with us today. This is really exciting to be here. Thank you for all those who attended the summit back earlier this year and for being here today as well. I don't normally beg for applause, but I'm going to ask, if you will, we have our Center of Innovation for Logistics has been ably led by Janine Miller for a number of years. She has, as I think many of you know, has received an incredible opportunity, an appointment to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. She will be the Director of Rural Infrastructure. I can't think of anyone who is more perfectly positioned to go and take that role. So if you'll, in her absence, if you will just help me give a warm applause for her service and good luck on her new opportunity. I should have videoed that and texted that to her, so missed opportunity. Really excited to be here today, and really my purpose here is just to say thank you. This industry continues to drive Georgia's economy. And you can quote stats about these many people work in this industry and this much investment, but really what I'm here to tell you today is no matter what kind of company is looking at Georgia, logistics is a key part of what they ask for. We have a prospect in this afternoon, and logistics is a key deciding point for where they're going to locate, whether they're going to be here or some of our competitor states. The three things that prospects when they come to Georgia, they ask about land, labor, and logistics. And our presentations are tailored to make sure that those companies know we can provide a great site, we can provide a great workforce, and that we can help them connect to their markets, whether it's here in Georgia, whether it's across the Southeast, across the country, or across the world. And you see these rankings come out every once in a while. Just last week, Georgia was ranked the #2 state for business by CNBC. We're ranked #1 by other magazines, which we talk about a lot. But embedded in those rankings are always very high-class, top marks for our infrastructure and our logistics. So again, on behalf of the state, when we sell the state to prospects, I just want to say thank you for continuing to grow this industry and be such a key part of what we sell to Georgia. You may have noticed the land, labor, and logistics, we're a marketing arm, so the 3 L's there, but I'd actually add a 4th L, and it's something that Rob just talked about, and that's leadership. Leadership is so important, certainly from the state level, but also from the industry level as well. And the leadership in this industry has continued to be supportive of the state. You look at around this area with Mayor Deloach, with CETA and the Georgia Ports Authority, are all key partners with us, and it all really comes back to leadership and partnership. And so on behalf, again, of the state, I want to thank all those great partners for lending their talents to our state's ability to sell our assets to prospects. I want to share a quick story. I heard a pastor give a sermon one time, and he was talking about how if you want to hear somebody's priorities, they will tell you what their priorities are, and a lot of times those priorities might not match up to what their actual priorities are. And he said, you'll notice how long ago this was, but you said if you look at somebody's checkbook and you look at their calendar, and you can really tell where their priorities were. And I would submit to you today that if you looked at the state's version of our checkbook, and if you looked at the state's version of our calendar, logistics is where our priority is. As Representative Carter mentioned, we have invested a significant number of man-hours and dollars into the SHEP project. The governor has led on that. The state has led out on it and invested state dollars even before the feds, what we believe, we think they will live up to their commitment. And so we have, on good faith, went out and funded the first portion of the project. And so I just commit to you today on behalf of Governor Deal and the department that logistics will continue to be a key part of our offering. We have 6 centers of innovation for logistics, and centers of innovation and logistics is one of those 6, and will continue to be. It's our largest center. And so, again, my message really today is just to say thank you for being here. Thank you for your contributions, and to stress to you that we are committed to the industry, committed to growth, because it's not only you and the jobs you create, but it's also all of those companies that look at Georgia and believe and know that logistics will be a key part of their success as well. So I'm looking forward to the panel today. That really is why I'm here, is to listen to the panel. So I'm going to get off the stage, but I just want to, again, thank you for being here. Thank you to our center and for Hunter McLean for putting this group together and this event together. It is a highlight of the year and something that we certainly would not miss being here for. And I just want to, again, thank you for your efforts. And please let us know if there's any way we can help your business, if there's any way we can help make Georgia stronger in the logistics world. We feel like we're pretty strong already, but if you have ideas, we are open to those because we're all about growing jobs, growing investment, and making the Georgia economy be as strong as it can be. So, again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bert, for those thoughts. Let's move on to the meat of the program. We're going to start with the panel, and I will introduce my friend and law partner, Colin McCrae, although he would probably describe our relationship as I'm a thorn in his side most of the time. Colin was, I'll say, born and raised in Savannah. That's fairly accurate. He's been here a long time. He only left to go up north to college at Yale, Then he came down and went to UGA Law School. Since he graduated, he's been at Hunter McLean, our law firm, for about 18, 19 years. So we hope that he's a lifer. But he is primarily an admiralty lawyer as well as a logistics lawyer. And so we've asked Colin to moderate the panel today. And I asked Colin to come on up and introduce our panelists.
How's everybody doing today? Like Brad said, my name's Colin McCrae, and I'm a partner in our transportation, logistics, and warehousing practice group at Hunter McLean. And in that capacity, as part of our logistics group, we have a commitment to staying abreast of new developments in the industry that we serve. And to do that, we make an annual pilgrimage up to Atlanta for the summit, the Center on Innovation and Logistics Summit, where a relative novice like myself can learn about new innovations in the industry and see how the industry leaders are incorporating these new changes and technologies into their operations. As Rob Dillon discussed, one of the things we learned a good deal about at this year's summit was disruptors, disruptors in the logistics industry. And that will, of course, be the topic of today's panel. Before I introduce our panelists and ask them to come up, and before we start the panel discussion, I thought I would just take a minute to define the term disruptors so that we have a feel for the level of change and innovation that we're talking about when we label something a disruptor. The term disruptor came into vogue back in the 1990s to describe an innovation that so revolutionizes a technology or a market that it actually displaces the existing market or industry and produces something that is new and efficient and more worthwhile. In short, a disruptor actually has both a destructive and a creative influence on the market or the industry. And for that reason, disruptors are typically thought of as technological advances, where a visionary entrepreneur comes up with a new technological gizmo or process that revolutionizes the industry. Think Uber ride sharing, or back in the day, the BlackBerry PDA. But as our panelists will point out, disruptors aren't always the product of such intentional and deliberative kind of process. And in fact, disruptors are not even limited to intentional attempts to innovate. For example, you may hear discussions today about how the economic downturn of the last decade served in and of itself as a disruptor that had the destructive and then resulting creative influence on the market, particularly the real estate market, the industrial real estate market here in the Savannah area. And of course, a discussion of disruptors would be incomplete if we just discuss those disruptors that have already arrived. Although admittedly, it's pretty exciting to hear about drone technology and autonomous vehicles and ride sharing and that kind of thing. We also will hear from our panelists about how you and your company can anticipate disruptors and be on the forefront of the innovation so that you're actually leading change as opposed to just reacting to it. So with that, I'd like to start by introducing and call up our panelists, and I'll call them up one by one. First, we have Derek Banta. He took over as the Director of Digital and Mobile Engagement at UPS in March of 2016. And in that capacity, Derek leads a team responsible for the development, implementation, and management of UPS's customer-facing applications and channels. Next, we have Stephanie Crow. She is the Senior Director of Global Learning and Development at Manhattan Associates. And in that capacity as Senior Director, Stephanie leads organizational transformation and change management for their clients in supply chain, commerce, and logistics. Next, we have Dr. Nagi Gabriel. He's an assistant professor in the School of Industrial and Systems Engineering at Georgia Tech, and his research focuses on machine learning and predictive analytics, which he'll talk at length about today. So if that's a term that you're not totally up on. You'll hear a good bit about it today. And in particular, his research in predictive analytics focuses on asset management and optimization in service, manufacturing, and energy applications. Last but not least, we have Bob Robbers from Cushman & Wakefield. He is the senior director with the industrial real estate division at Cushman & Wakefield and works on their global supply chain solutions team, specializing in e-commerce site selection projects, which brings him down to the Savannah area a good bit, I understand. Bob's e-commerce projects include Wayfair, Dick's Sporting Goods, among many others. So let's kick off our panel discussion about logistics industry disruptors with Derek. Do we have the microphone? You got it? Great, thanks. Let's start with Derek. Derek, I gave a little teaser about some of these industry disruptors, but let me ask you about two that I find particularly interesting. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are fascinating topics that are ripped right out of science fiction. Can you explain for our audience the difference between these two related concepts and give an overview of how UPS employs artificial intelligence and machine learning to drive efficiencies?
Sure, thank you guys for having me. Najee, you can step in and correct me if I misspeak here. I'm certainly not an academic as it relates to machine learning and artificial intelligence. I think people use those terms often interchangeably, and they're very, very different. So the example I always use when I talk about machine learning, it's I can show you a picture of a dump truck and another picture of a dump truck, and over time I can teach you that the picture I'm showing you is a dump truck, and then it can go out and find other images that look like a dump truck. So we're teaching that machine to recognize a specific thing. Artificial intelligence, on the other hand, is teaching that machine to act like a human. And basically giving them the characteristics to be put in a situation and make decisions different than a human. So it's more than just object identification. And this is sort of like the holy grail of what people are trying to accomplish from an automation perspective. But I think it's been a little bit elusive in terms of how people are, getting benefits from it. But the reality is, it's here. You don't have to go much further than watching your kids interact with their devices. The reality is they're doing things to engage in different ways than we ever did. And that artificial intelligence is beginning to take off. So you watch people interact with Siri and others. I think my favorite AI that I interact with on an everyday basis is my Comcast remote. So I can talk to my Comcast remote, I can use funny voices, and it always recognizes what I'm asking for, and it returns back what I'm looking for. So the key there is that you've got an engine on the back end that works and is valuable, and so I continue to use it. As far as business application of AI and machine learning and how we get impact from it, at UPS, we make our money by picking up and delivering packages and doing it in a predictable, on-time fashion. So we've built our routes around being optimized, and we try to get to stops in specific order. However, reality happens and traffic happens and things happen, and we have to do what we call break trace. When a driver breaks trace, is they stop their route, they drive to the delivery that is committed by a specific time, make that delivery, and then historically they would go back to the place that they started and pick up their route there. So we deployed a technology a couple years ago called Orion. And what Orion allows us to do is use machine learning and AI to pick up at that route and re-optimize from that point of delivery. So rather than driving back to their old route and picking up at that point, Orion dynamically reroutes the package car from that point forward and ultimately saves both time and miles. And for us, time and miles equals money. So Orion uses a combination of AI and machine learning. So it uses a clustering algorithm, which is machine learning, that says, hey, these stops should all be delivered together. And then it uses AI to say, based on where I am, how would I optimize from here? So it's teaching it to think like a driver. And that doesn't seem like a big deal, but the reality is we built that on a plan to save 4 miles per driver with the full deployment of Orion. That doesn't sound like much, right? 4 miles a day. But, you know, compound that times 88,000 drivers a day. And what we're talking about is a $400 million annuity on an annual basis for us. So I'm going to say that number again because it's pretty big. $400 million by plugging in a algorithmic artificial intelligence engine called Orion that allows us to save, you know, time and money in terms of miles. So it's reduced wear and tear on vehicles. It's reduced miles in terms of fuel consumption. It's better optimizing that driver's time. So we've put into practice this algorithm and this logic to, you know, to revolutionize how we do deliveries. And there's been a lot written on Orion, but there's also other areas. So that's looking at one aspect of our business, and that's, you know, the end delivery. But there's also inside operations where we can do the same thing. There's the line haul across that where we can optimize networks. So I would call that the tip of the iceberg, and that's really how we're looking at doing things in a world where, you know, quite frankly, the target is on our back from a disruption perspective. I was reading an article in TechCrunch that said $6.3 billion was invested across 150 companies in the third quarter of 2016. That $6.3 billion is $200 million more than was invested in all of 2015. And combined, those two numbers represent more investment than like the last decade. So if we don't think the logistics industry has a giant target on our back and, you know, we aren't, you know, steeped deeply in engineering and gaining efficiencies, then we will be disrupted. So we are doing everything we can to stay on the forefront of that and investing in technology that will help us deliver very, very efficiently with an amazing customer experience.
Great. Thanks for that. So next to you, Stephanie, obviously Derek was talking about, you know, logistics companies perceiving themselves as having a target on their back and having to, you know, be on the forefront of the leading edge of change. Tell me about, at Manhattan Associates, how you guys assist companies who are looking to take advantage of being a change leader as opposed to a company that just reacts to the existence of change.
Sure, Colin, thanks. I actually brought a few slides just to kind of help me remember all those numbers that you just rolled off the top of your head. But like you, Manhattan Associates believes in competitive technology to help innovate. But in order to lead, we have to know what's really causing the disruption. Firstly, I want to share with you guys a little reflection. You don't have to look very far to realize how much disruption is going on in the industry. You can really just look at your own shopping and buying habits or your own procurement habits in your own organization to realize how significantly everything's changed in the last 5 years, say nothing about the last 10 or 20. So firstly, just think about what you're doing in terms of personal grocery delivery, researching online before you buy, showing up in store and finding out that you might actually want something shipped to you. But I'm here to tell you that it's not just happening in retail, and I think most of the folks here in this room understand that that's true. By 2020 in the US, the B2B e-commerce industry is projected to be $1.3 trillion. That's the US alone. So that's B2B. And quite frankly, 72% of that business is in large and complex operations, which has significant disruptive impact to logistics and how those things are getting delivered. We also see that brand manufacturers are seeing 20 to 30% growth in direct-to-consumer. And I think we understand that conceptually, but think about our traditional understanding about how logistics fits into the supply chain commerce story. These are brand manufacturers going direct to consumer, and manufacturers and wholesalers are also going direct to consumer. So those are important disruptions for you to be aware of when you're thinking about how you're designing your logistics solutions or supporting logistics through the supply chain commerce industry. I also have to say from a retail perspective that although retail is growing between 2 and 3%, depending on what numbers you look at, the e-com portion is growing in double digits. That's 15 to 20% on the digital side. And we're also seeing in our clients in our space that digital is driving physical store interactions and purchases, and showing up at the physical bricks and mortar stores and environments is driving digital business. So that interaction is creating more business and more impact, by the way, on the logistics industry. So that flexibility is being shown in that 62% of businesses say that in the next 3 years they're going to invest in either adding or improving their buy anywhere, ship anywhere capability. I mean, that's got logistics written all over it. That's good for you guys too, right? Okay. So now what does that really mean to the folks in this room? I would say that most of the folks are here because you know that there's a reason to be interested in disruption right now. You have a why. You know why your business is looking at change, looking at disruption, so you probably have a good story for that. I will tell you, though, that the way to achieve great change in response to disruption, what we've seen is that the why has to be meaningful to everyone across your organization, to your partners, to the people that you work with, and to every employee. So that finding that spark that's going to motivate people to do things differently than they've always done it for time immemorial, they've got to have a reason, and that why has to be crafted so that it's meaningful to them. So we say find that spark. The second thing that I think is absolutely true is for significant disruptive change, like we're seeing, you really have to have everybody rowing in the same direction, right? So aligning your teams in towards a direction when you're going to innovate, when you're dealing with disruptive change, alignment is key. And that's not always easy to do. The final thing is what I would call, and I think we've talked about it a little bit today already, is leadership. And I don't just mean leadership from the top. This could be leadership from the middle or leadership from the organization as a whole, is leaders have to be able to remove the barriers and obstacles that keep us from achieving true innovation. There are a lot of barriers in terms of how we've always done it, in terms of what people are motivated to do, what systems we've created, what processes are the way we've always done it, and quite frankly, what systems and technology. We believe that Manhattan Associates systems and technology are very innovative and will help you capture this new digital environment, but at the same time, using systems and technology, to your point, Eric, of removing those obstacles that may frustrate or keep our people and our teams from achieving the true success they're going for.
Great. Thank you for that, Stephanie. Next, I want to talk to Nagi about his research at Georgia Tech, which has focused on one specific area of disruption, and that is predictive analytics. Again, as I introduced earlier, we may not all have a strong background in what that represents, but Nagi, if you could explain for the audience your research and maybe show us how predictive analytics can be applied to the supply chain industry.
Sure. Thank you, Colin, and thank you, everyone. So predictive analytics, if you're a old-fashioned person like myself, it's just a fancy word for statistical analysis. And at Georgia Tech today, I'm actually representing some of the leading folks and leading researchers at the Supply Chain Institute at Georgia Tech, where cutting-edge research in logistics and implementing new ideas for optimizing logistics are really being born. And so part of our job is really to look at what's the evolution and the evolutionary process of these new technologies. So we always go back to the origins. We always study the origins, and that's why we tend to be as more progressive and forward-looking as we are. We always try to look at the core and where it all started. So predictive analytics is one of the key disruptors today, and it leverages a lot of the tools that were mentioned by Colin and Derek, machine learning. You can use machine learning and artificial intelligence to do a lot of the analytics that are performed and understanding different relationships between data, right? Data in the past was something that was typically overlooked. So the most ambitious thing that you could do with data is essentially do a small graph in Excel. But as time progressed, a lot of companies have now been overwhelmed with different types of data and different silos of data. There can be two adjacent departments who are using totally different software, and both of them are dealing with data that cannot talk to each other or leverage any information from their colleagues. And this is because of the nature of the speed at which this evolutionary process took place and the lack of integration of software development that overshadows or overlooks these complex relationships. Today, predictive analytics using and powered by machine learning tools allows you to do that. Cuts across silos, physical silos, and even geographical silos. You can do analytics on demand, studying market trends, retail behavior, procurement analytics, transportation analytics. A classic example was actually Derek's example at UPS. That's absolutely a classic thing that we teach in some of our classes to some of our students. Optimization-centered analytics. You're talking about inventory, warehousing, network, the supply chain, distribution depots, and all that good stuff. Now, one of the key aspects of supply chain that has often been overlooked is supply chain of spare parts. And classically, supply chain of spare parts has been pretty much ignored because most of the profits, most of the pricing has been driven by the end product or finished goods. So management always looks at where is the money, right? They often overlook the cost center that typically sinks a lot of that of the profits and extracts a lot of the profit from the bottom line. So today I'm going to shed some light on a disruptor which relates to the supply chain of spare parts. And to give you an idea of the magnitude and the amount of money that can be saved in this field, just consider the following examples. We have Delta and the airline, American Airline, United, all these airlines. Some of them have up to $1 billion of spare parts just sitting in warehouses. And many of these components and many of these parts become obsolete. Even the power companies and the power generation companies, they have a lot of their spare parts, almost $1.5 billion sitting in inventory. And I think I skipped that slide pretty fast. So just to give you an idea, many of these things, almost a quarter, 25 to 30% of these parts become obsolete over time. And they end up having to discard some of these components. This is completely wasted money. If you are able to keep track of the amount of spare parts and the kind of spare parts that you have, and sort of move and migrate from a culture of just in case to a culture of just in time spare parts, you will save tremendous amount of money to be had in the spare parts supply chain. And what's unique about this is the fact that many of the understanding of the demand can actually be gathered through the supply chain analytics and sensor analytics that are typically driven by sensors being embedded on assets that are in the field. For example, trucks. You have trucks in the field. You have a lot of trucks that have sensors on them that can be monitored remotely. So regardless of the location of the truck, you can actually monitor different systems on the truck to assess the health. Many energy companies are actually monitoring their assets, capital-intensive assets. So everything is really, there's a huge opportunity there. And I feel that predictive analytics is one of the key drivers in this field, especially in the supply chain as it relates to spare parts. So.
Thank you for that, Nagy. One point that Nagy brought up as being taught at Georgia Tech these days is optimization of warehouse space. And so I'll turn to you, Bob, from the industrial real estate angle. The disruptor of e-commerce and e-fulfillment has definitely had a disruptive effect on the supply chain and logistics industry. And what I want to ask is, how have you seen warehouse construction, particularly in the Savannah area, evolve to accommodate the different needs that e-commerce and e-fulfillment represent?
Excellent question. Thank you for having me. I actually have a couple slides to address that very topic to make sure that I didn't forget something, but also to perhaps spur on additional discussion on the topic. Right. Oh. You can tell I didn't present that slide. I'll let you finish. Thank you, thank you. I'm with Cushman & Wakefield, and we're one of the largest global providers of real estate services in the world, and we get a lot of lessons learned both on the forefront and anecdotally. We try to put those into practice as to how to best inform our clients and how to invest appropriately to those institutional clients who are looking to build properties. So I just got a couple slides that'll help kind of frame the discussion. And I'm part of an e-commerce group that's called a New Commerce. The tagline has been put in place by Ben Conwell. Ben leads our e-commerce practice for our company, and he is an former Amazon executive. He brings an astute knowledge of not only their network, but the leading disruptors in the industry. The next evolution of the e-commerce, most people have acknowledged that we're ordering on the smartphones and we're ordering on iPads and getting it delivered differently. It's not so much e-commerce, it's the new commerce. How is that going to interact with the existing bricks and mortar locations, and how best to advise those clients who are really trying to figure out where should we invest the next 100 million? Should it be in stores, in DCs, in fulfillment, in trucks, in transportation? This is a couple slides that are just indicative of the industry that we find ourselves in. And I know that Stephanie hinted on the retail sales growth, and especially most of the retail sales growth driven by e-commerce. Not a surprise. This is the next slide. If you remember anything, it'll be this one. There's Amazon, and then there's everyone else. And that's not a typo. The line on the bottom is Amazon. And it's representative of the biggest disruptor that this marketplace has ever seen. And it's in a good way, because it's forcing the institutional knowledge to be deployed, helping take the cost and the inefficiencies out of a network. And if you are not going to acknowledge that there's significant disruptors and invest heavily in your network, you find yourselves on the outside looking in. So the fact that Amazon's doing what they're doing is not a surprise. The fact is that so many companies that do work in Savannah are working for Amazon. Didn't even know that. So many of the companies that we buy from, they're not Amazon. They're part of Amazon Web Services. They're a part of the Amazon marketplace. So the truth is they just developed a whole new shopping mall of sorts for people to procure their goods. And another way, if you need it today, that's great. If you need it next week, that's great. You'll pay a proportionally different amount. But lastly, this is where Amazon is investing their dollars in the infrastructure. It was in 10 years ago, they were investing heavily in the big fulfillment centers, and they've done that sufficiently well. The colorful lines at the end would suggest that the last mile are the key focus for them in the future, is getting closer and closer to the U.S. population. The Holy Grail, as you see in the basket, is a topic very timely, and that's Amazon's impact and the impact of e-commerce on grocery shopping. And I can tell you firsthand that my next door neighbor never goes to the store. She has it delivered almost every day. And I still don't believe it, but it's amazing that she's able to get that done and utilize her time differently. But the mergers and acquisitions are likely to follow. Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods, while it's not yet complete, and there's some discussion about the oversight on the part of the U.S. government as to whether or not that is a good thing. The truth is it's going to legitimize the fact that it's not all going to e-commerce. In fact, bricks and mortar has a vital role in the supply chain. And it simply states that you have to have that superior experiential feel for the e-commerce and for the retail shopper to feel like if they want to go get it, they can go get it. If they want you to deliver it, you can deliver it. And lastly, how it impacts the buildings that we're seeing. Undoubtedly, we've seen a lot of the big bombers, the big million-square-foot buildings for e-commerce. That's interesting, and it's very difficult to predict what the next one will look like. But I can tell you that the amount of money spent inside the building dwarfs the amount of money spent on the building. So ideally, the e-commerce and a lot of the fulfillment operations are asking us, hold off and don't build a building, just find us a site. So from a site selection, we're looking at labor, demographics, the regulatory environment that we find ourselves in, and the incentives that are appropriate for the amount of investment that the companies are making. They're trying to figure out how best to customize the building to suit their needs. And if anyone understands that this is at least a 10-year commitment on the investment, let's remind everyone that 10 years ago, no one had an iPhone. So if you're willing to bank your entire career on what the next 10 years has to follow, it's just best to be on the forefront and not a reactive presence in that. And lastly, we get questions all the time about how best to be the employer of choice, because it's not just a location. We need to be successful. So it really revolves around the worker. We've seen the impact on buildings, both in Atlanta and Savannah. A warehouse job is not entirely complex, yet if you're tasked with some of the fulfillment operations and you're on the second floor of that warehouse, it could be dang hot. So we're actually putting air conditioning in a lot of warehouses. Amazon is doing the same. So if you have 400 employees, you better figure out a way to feed them at lunchtime, because you don't want 400 people leaving at lunch. So those kind of dynamics are in play right now. And lastly, on the distribution, undoubtedly there's a shift, and as many different ways as the customer wants it, that's as many different ways as we'll get it to them. And lastly is that our group is constantly challenged at how to advise our clients. All we know is no one is the same as your neighbor, as your competitor. They're all very unique depending on their imports and their exports and their flows. But it does require the analytics, and I think it goes back to the analytics, to prove your case so that you invest the next $100 million on the appropriate location, on the appropriate size.
Great. Thank you for that, Bob. And discussing Amazon as the 800-pound gorilla, or the $94 billion gorilla, is a good segue to a discussion that I'd like Derek to lead for us, and that is the use of drone technology. I've seen some schematics pulled from patent applications by Amazon of these floating drone distribution centers, which obviously are kind of, futuristic and not very practical right now. But can you tell us a little bit about how UPS, in light of the regulatory climate that you're faced with now, and government is notoriously slow to respond to disruptors like drone technology, but how do you foresee drone technology being incorporated into the logistics field?
So, great question, and certainly one that I get often. Drones and autonomous vehicles are like the two hot things that everybody talks about. And the reality is drones are commercially here. You see them on an everyday basis with hobbyists, but there are actual practical applications that exist for drones in the immediate term. When you think about a package, flying from one location to another to deliver 16 million packages a day, there's a lot of FAA regulations and things that have to take place. So we're staying very, very close to what's going on with regulations. As a matter of fact, we have a pilot that sits on the board that is writing the rules around what that looks like. When you think about how we're using them today, I think people may have seen a video where we had a package car making a delivery in a rural area and a drone flying off the top of it to fly autonomously to go make another remote delivery. Remote delivery as a driver helper is a certainly interesting space for us to look at. So why drive 3 miles one way and 3 miles back when I can make double duty of a route? So that's an interesting space for us. We're using them every day in Rwanda for relief with a company called Zipline. But these aren't the types of drones that you think of. They're fixed wing for long distances with lack of infrastructure. And they basically have hooks, and we're dropping relief effort in Rwanda literally on an everyday basis. There's been a few tests that we've done for internal warehousing, so checking inventory levels, even things like aircraft maintenance where you can fly around and see things happening. with drones. Those are interesting use cases that we're investing in and understanding. You can't be a company like ours with a deep engineering background trying to wring out efficiencies and not be intrigued by drones and autonomous vehicles. On the autonomous vehicle front, there's a tremendous amount of interesting things happening in that space. Sort of the precursor to autonomous vehicles are collision avoidance systems, and all the tractor trailers that we're buying today come equipped with collision avoidance systems. From a personal perspective, my son just turned 15 yesterday and got his learner's permit. So if we could accelerate autonomous vehicles, I've got 3 more coming at 13, 13, and 11. The sooner the better. But the reality is autonomous vehicles have a place, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done around that. So we're staying close to that. UPS has a strategic enterprise fund that invests in a ton of, not a ton, but several companies a year for knowledge returns. So we invest in companies to learn about automation, to learn about these disruptive technologies so that we can figure out what we're doing so that we can adopt the things that are going to take off and maybe not overinvest in other technologies.
Great, thanks for that. Stephanie, turning to you, some of these disruptive technologies that Derek is talking about, they require that a company let go of these entrenched ideas about how things should be done, breaking down the barriers, as you pointed out earlier. Can you give the audience some real-world examples of how Manhattan Associates has helped companies to break away from the norm, destroy those barriers you talked about?
Sure, absolutely. Certainly innovation requires that you let go of some old things, and a lot of young, nimble companies are taking bites at a lot of the space that well-established companies are in. So one of the things we've done is, certainly we start first with great technology, right, and encouraging our clients to select software that will help them differentiate and move forward and capture some of this sort of digital space, the digital to physical space, be more commerce ready. One of the speakers at our recent Momentum user conference was Rob Bass of Best Buy. And I think he had a great story, and Best Buy is a great story of a real turnaround of a company that was not doing well in terms of the stores and having to close stores and what was happening in the physical bricks and mortar space. So Manhattan Associates really helped them to change what they were doing and capture that digital audience, and from a commerce perspective, and connect the digital with the physical space. And the experience you now have in a store, if you go into Best Buy, is very deeply and closely linked to your digital experience. That's sort of one face of the customer, get it from anywhere to anywhere. So that real connection has something to do with the technology, but it also has a lot to do with getting the teams, the leaders aligned, speaking to leading the change, removing those barriers, like you said. One of the other favorite stories from that team, speaking of removing barriers, is that leadership team uses what's called a get-out-of-jail-free card. So each leader has the opportunity to say, oh, I tried something, I made a mistake, and it didn't work. Here's my get-out-of-jail-free card. I'm pretty sure they're renewable. But the point being that innovation takes some risk, and you have to be aligned and get trust and have that that trust from the beginning. So getting everyone together, saying this is what we're trying to do, we believe this to be important, and giving the ability for great ideas and innovation to happen amongst the teams. One of the things we do in our change management methodology is we include the people who will be impacted by the change early and throughout the process. One of my favorite terms that we use, although it doesn't work for everyone, is change ambassadors. So what we do is we identify what are the target groups that are going to need to really help lead this change throughout the organization, inside and outside of the organization, sometimes with vendors and partners and other teams. They might be regionally, there might be multiple distribution centers, and identifying change ambassadors who are on the ground, people who will run into people at the water cooler, people who will run into people at the entrance to the distribution center and say, hey, What's going on with that thing we said that we were going to do? Because more often than not, a leader will come in and say, here's what we're going to do, charge. And then 6 months later, people say, whatever happened with what's going on with that big innovative thing? So the change ambassadors are able to hear what's going on with any massive innovation going on, any projects going on, really answer any questions, help also, by the way, since communication is a two-way street, create a channel to feedback from who's being impacted by this change, what questions are we hearing, and as we innovate, what's working and what's not working. Because having that two-way channel helps you continuously innovate. The final point I'll make is that leading change is not a one-time event. So the other special thing that we do with our clients is we don't just drop in, parachute in, or drone in, I guess, nowadays, and say, we'll do this for you, and then leave. Because change is not a one-time event. Things will continue to progress and innovate, and disruption will continue to happen. So what we do is we build change capacity in supply chain commerce organizations. So those change ambassadors learn how to lead change, learn how to effectively communicate, learn how to effectively deal with resistance to change, and then they can go forward with the next and the next and the next change. And that's something we've done with several clients, and they've now taken that forward, made it their own, so they can continue to lead change and be capable of leading change in their organization.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that, Stephanie. Turning to you, Nagi, wanted to revisit one of the aspects of your presentation earlier, and that was the supply chain field as it relates to spare part fulfillment. And that touches upon another buzzword or disruptor that we all know a little bit about, and that is the industrial Internet of Things. I wonder if you could talk to the audience about how your research has explored the industrial Internet of Things.
Sure. Thank you, Colin. So whenever I hear the word industrial, or the abbreviation in IoT, or Industrial Internet of Things, sometimes I cringe, because the typical example is from a presenter, or the speaker is your toaster will be able to phone home. So it's like, so I like to refer to it as the Internet of significant things, right? Things that actually matter. Let's say a gas turbine in a substation, a diesel generator on a ship that's transporting goods from the other side of the world. So the spare parts space is closely linked with asset management. And asset management is closely linked with reliability and maintenance. And so having this predictive analytics framework on top as a weave between spare parts, asset management, and maintenance creates a classic example of the Internet of Things, where you're monitoring these different assets. And especially in the logistics space, you have fleets of trucks, trailers, aircrafts. Each aircraft has a jet engine. Today, all of these jet engines are equipped with sensors that actually measure health and performance metrics and send out signals to what is called a monitoring and diagnostics center in some location that receives all this information on a minute-by-minute basis. So almost every 5 minutes, there is a ping from all the jet engines that are on a specific fleet, indicating what's the health state of that jet engine. And some operators or supervisors on the ground, they receive on their text messages or emails that once this aircraft lands, make sure that it's grounded for maintenance, or check something, a specific item on the jet engine itself. So this is a space that is rapidly growing, and it's very relevant to the IoT. And as we move along and we progress, and this space even grows further, and the cost of sensing technology becomes even cheaper, we'll be hit by another buzzword, which is the big data. Big data is currently a big buzzword in the retail and social media side, but on the industry side, it hasn't really made its way too much or hasn't seen so much traction. But the reality is, as these sensing technology become cheaper and cheaper, you will have an abundance of data. So today in the energy space, I work a lot with the utility companies. The first thing that they talk about when we talk about analytics or IoT, they say, we're overwhelmed with data and we don't know what to do with it. And that's a classic example. It's just the same sentence with competitors, people who don't know each other. It's almost as if they memorized it. It's amazing the effect that massive amounts of data have created on industry. And having these very efficient predictive analytics tools to leverage relationships and extract hidden relationships from the different data is key to advancing the industrial Internet of Things or the industrial Internet of significant things. So I hope that answers that.
Derek.
So one of the things that has frustrated me for a number of years is this concept of big data. And big data is no different than decision science, which has been around forever. So, the reality is big data is this buzzword, but I was reading an article the other day that said 90% of all data was created in the last 18 months, and we expect that cycle to continue. We reached a tipping point, I can't remember the year, 2008, where there were more devices connected to the internet than there are people in the world. We expect the number of devices by 2020 to exceed 20 billion. And the reality is you've got a couple of things converging. You've got, battery power cost coming down that can be activated only when necessary, which extends the lifespan of a sensor. You have the cost of sensors coming down. You have the cost of data coming down. The convergence of those three things makes, the number of devices connected almost infinite. So the possibilities are limited by our imagination. And the reality is we're going to, the things that we think we're going to see are not even where we are heading. I think back to when I was a kid, I would ride my bike to the mall. I watch my kids and I talk to them about the mall. They're like, what the hell's the mall? So the reality is the digital natives will create things that are mind-blowing to us. And it's going to happen in our lifetimes.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Derek. Well, to segue from big data to our small, sleepy town of Savannah, Bob, you obviously have a good frame of reference and experience with the industrial real estate market here in Savannah. And I want to just kind of ask you point blank, should we expect significant growth to continue here in Savannah despite the relatively small population center that we represent?
That's a very good question. I have an exciting answer. Yeah. Drum roll. The answer is a yes, and a resounding yes, and for the following reasons. Savannah, as we know, is a well-positioned port with a unique balance of import-export trade, which presents just an incredible opportunity for retailers to take advantage of the lowest possible landed costs. So when the SHEP project is completed, but even beforehand, Savannah's importance in the overall national supply chain it was well known, and yet post-Panama Canal and with Suez Canal traffic continuing to build, we're seeing the biggest ships already in Savannah, and granted they're not full, but they will be full post-SHEP, and those ships are going to continue to influence the flow of goods. And I'm fortunate enough to be part of a great team where we are able to combine our resources, but also to share some best practices on how do we predict the future and advise our clients accordingly, and advise the investor community as to what to build and where to build it and how big to build it. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about in Savannah, is that there is going to be significant disruption. We're seeing million-foot buildings where Savannah generally didn't see that kind of investment. Savannah is not the biggest of the MSAs. There's not consumption, but it's a tremendous import location. So its importance is immeasurable, and many of the retail and distribution companies will, if you employ a four-corner strategy in any semblance, Savannah's going to play such an important role, especially in an Asian trade lane, that Savannah's importance will continue to grow. We're at 50 million square feet of measurable industrial space in Savannah. Our projections have that going to 75 million, not in 10 years, in between 5 to 6 years. And that would suggest, how is that possible? It's not dramatically different than 5 to 7 to 8% annualized growth. And when each building is 500 to 1 million feet, that's some pretty big chunks that come on the market and come off the market. So what we're seeing is the investor community is trying to figure out, what do we build? You need to build tall buildings because you possibly might have an internet procurement and fulfillment center located there. They're going to have multiple stories of distribution located in that building. At a minimum, you're going to build a tall building so you can rack out the product. You have racks that'll go as high as eight positions high, and that means you need thicker floors. So we got thicker floors. We have bigger buildings. Something as mundane as lighting. We look at all of our new buildings that we're advising, we put LED lights in, and we do the math and tell you exactly. It doesn't matter how much the LED lights cost. You do not have to change out a bulb or a ballast in a conventional warehouse for a fluorescent bulb. That's important when you're trying to stay online, and you don't want that scissor lift truck traveling through there and taking the operation down for any measurable time. So the impact for Savannah is significant in that we see more investment in Savannah because Savannah is a conduit to the southeast. And our metrics would suggest that of all the volume that comes through Savannah from a retail perspective, 2/3 goes to Atlanta and distributes otherwise, and 1/3 goes elsewhere. Of all the volume that goes to Atlanta, 1/3 goes by rail and 2/3 goes by truck. So we're working with the port, we're working with the railroads to try to figure out how best to convert some of that traffic to be rail, even though it's rather short haul, rail to from Savannah to Atlanta. And when I first started doing this 10 years ago, and I sat in the room with our friends at the port, and I said, "Do you realize that I can walk from Savannah to Atlanta faster than a container can get delivered there?" And it's absolutely true, because based on the scheduling that was in place at the time, now we've made that tremendous strides that would suggest that now it's same day. And we just need the predictability. And so the on-port activity that the port is investing in and the Jimmy DeLoach connector, all of the infrastructure investment that's taking place in addition to SHEP just has tremendous impact because we're a big catcher's mitt. There's going to be a lot more investment coming. And it's fun to be doing this job in Georgia, in Savannah, because there is so much going on. But we also have to recognize it's a competitive landscape, and Charleston's making advances, and there are other port cities that are trying to do their best. Savannah is immeasurably well-positioned to compete. And what does that mean for the 3PLs in the marketplace? If there's any consolence of, if you don't know what to do, hire a 3PL, because it just buys you time. And that's what we're finding. More and more of the advanced 3PL, a lot of the bid packages that go out to the 3PL community, they used to be not very well thought out. And they are becoming more complex, and more science has gone into the bid process so that you understand exactly what you're getting from a service provider. You can measure it. If it's not working, either party has the opportunity to raise their hand and adjust, so that no one is stuck with a bad deal. And I think that's why Savannah is so important, is that we have a tremendous 3PL base here that is undoubtedly going to continue to grow their own companies, but also new entrants to take advantage of that institutional knowledge in Savannah, which is kind of different from a DC that's run in Atlanta.
Great, thank you for that, Bob. I've taken the opportunity to ask some of the questions that I've been curious about, and I want to, of course, open up the floor at this time for a Q&A for anybody who has questions that they want to ask of our panelists. So we'll have some mics coming around the room. Just raise your hand and a mic will be brought to you. We've got one back in the back, and while it's traveling back there, one of the takeaways, Bob, talking about the Savannah market relative to its, to its size, a takeaway from the summit, there was a presenter from the GPA who pointed out that this huge OOCL vessel that had just called the East Coast, and I think it was New York, Norfolk, Charleston, and Savannah. And if there were 1,600 container moves in New York and 1,500 in Norfolk and 1,400 in Charleston, I might have those numbers slightly off, but there were nearly 5,000 in Savannah. So relative to its size, we are seen as an important destination. So our question back in the back right.
Thank you, Colin. I'm McLeod Rominger with the Colonial Group. Question regarding blockchain transactions. I was wondering if anybody on the panel could discuss blockchain with relevance to speed, efficiency, and security throughout the logistics chain.
Anybody want to grab that? McLeod, we may need a primer on blockchain transactions before we answer.
So I'm somewhat familiar with what blockchain is. It's the socialization of the data to provide, basically better security. It's an area that is interesting to us. UPS, how do you protect transactions? It's something that we're exploring. I'm not familiar with all the work that's being done around blockchain. It's certainly, basically Bitcoin made it, famous, and people are exploring how blockchain will impact the supply chain. And I think there's a ton of stuff around chain of custody that will have impact. It's really, really early on, and there's a lot of things happening in that space. I'm just not familiar with everything that UPS is doing in there.
Well, while we're waiting.
Sorry, I've got a question over here.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Bo Gregory. I'm the president of Development Authority in Monroe County. Over here. And this is sort of to the state, but also to you. When we talk about disruptors, the largest one that we're seeing, we can give dirt, power, water, with I-75 going through, but it's finding the workforce that's trained and is available and is reliable to show up, and particularly with a lot of the security concerns that go with the port and infrastructure. What are y'all working with that might assist us, or what can we do to assist y'all and the state in some better way to make sure that when all this great growth comes, that we've got enough people to actually fulfill those jobs that are needed in procurement?
It's a good question. That might be more local, and as the only local person here, I guess I could maybe take that. I don't have the silver bullet for it. I think it's a solution that has been puzzling the local business community for years. One thought might be to create a center, perhaps at a grad student level here in Savannah, to address the logistics workforce and the needs for that. We've got a great network of universities here, Savannah State, Armstrong, Savannah Tech, that could populate a center like that. That's just a thought from me in my individual capacity. But anybody else have any thoughts on that, Stephanie?
Sure. I feel the need to represent the learning community a little bit. And we work with Georgia Tech quite a bit, but there are organizations throughout Georgia that are working on building up the workforce, and logistics is one of the key areas that is an area of focus. I will also say, though, that we have in Georgia, whether you're talking about the Technology Association of Georgia, whether you're talking about Georgia Learns and other organizations, that are sort of standing at the ready to help organizations build their workforce capacity. So this is a bit of a chicken and the egg issue of, look, if the business comes here, we have great innovation, we have great learning technologies, we have great learning capacity across Georgia, and I think in Savannah as well, in particular, so that in fact, these organizations that have fear, it's really because they're looking at something they don't know how to do. They don't necessarily have training or learning capacity within their organization. And in fact, what I would stress is the wide range with community colleges, with the technological colleges, with the learning capacity and that we have across our communities in Georgia, that we have it. It's just we're not as aware of it because we're thinking chicken and the egg. Do we already have the workforce? Absolutely we do. Are they already trained? For which jobs? Can you bring them here and then we'll go ahead and train them up?
So I think if I understood the question correctly, it's not necessarily skilled jobs, it's less skilled jobs that we're struggling to fit. And I don't think that's an issue that is unique to Georgia. I spent 6 years out in California, and we had unemployment approaching 3%, which basically is effectively no unemployment. The reality is, for low-skilled jobs, we have to do things to make them more attractive. You know, it impacts our business. We go from 16 million packages a day to 38 million over like a 6-week period. We have to ramp up and hire, I think last year the number was 90,000 people. So the reality is we have to relook at how we look at those jobs. How do we bring on and onboard 90,000 people and have them be impactful? It's something that I understand and can relate to, but it's not my core piece. If you want specifics on how UPS handles that, I'm happy to connect you with the people that do that, but it comes down to rethinking everything. You know, the dyad for us is the board in which you sign for packages. It's where all the information goes. Well, if I'm adding driver helpers to every car and I've got to double dyads, I have to double hardware. Well, is there a way to make that mobile? So can I do a bring your own device? There's a ton of ways into which we can make those things. It requires creativity, rethinking, problem solving. But the reality is, you know, if you know what your challenge is and you know that your jobs aren't that attractive, how do I do things to make them more attractive? And I'm happy to connect you with our folks in HR that do that every day.
Yeah, so like the panelists say, this is a challenge that has been worked on for years, and maybe it'll take some breaking down of barriers and moving past some Trent's thoughts on how to grow that workforce. Sandy, do we have a question over here?
Good morning, good afternoon, I should say. My name is Reginald Sykes, Contracted Management Service Incorporated. I have a follow-up question regarding the local training activities here in Savannah. There are training mechanisms in this area that teaches supply chain logistics. Savannah Technical College has a program in Fast Track that teaches global supply chain logistics. Everything from receiving to stocking to order processing and to shipping. And that program is a very successful program at Savannah Technical College. It is important that all of those who are looking for entry-level labor is to make contact with Savannah Technical College because they've got a great program. Oh, and by the way, I'm the instructor. Okay.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? I've got a couple I might lob at these unsuspecting panelists that we maybe haven't discussed. For the whole panel, anybody that wants to weigh in on this, but another disruptor that we see in the world at large that I'd like to hear if there's any applicability in the supply chain and logistics field is crowdsourcing. You know, in the movement of passengers, we know about Lyft and Uber. Does anybody see an opportunity there in the movement of goods?
Sure, I can pick that one up just in a couple areas, and I would love for my colleagues to kind of give additional ideas. But there are two areas that we're seeing this. One is in we call it the gig nation, okay? So people who want to pick up a second shift or who want to pick up an alternate job, using our labor management software to be able to identify if, hey, you know what, I'd like to pick up another gig. So people might be pre-qualified to perform a certain function in their supply chain operation and then basically sign up for, hey, there's a shift available, seasonal workforce or otherwise, and would you be interested in that shift? And checking the compliance with related to, can they work that time? Are they qualified to do that shift, that sort of thing. The exact same thing is happening on the carrier side. So basically Uberizing transportation. So essentially, if you have a route that needs to be picked up and you have pre-authorized carriers to say, I'd like to pick up that route, I'd like to pick up that delivery. So that's something that is new in our software that also has, you know, change implications from a disruption standpoint of being able to vendor out or put out to tender these alternate options for overflow of carriers.
Yeah, Derek?
So we have a little bit of experience in this space as well. Coyote Logistics is a company. Think of them as Uber for trucks. We bought them last year, or might have been 18 months ago. But anyway, we made a strategic investment and bought Coyote Logistics, brought them into the UPS family. There's also two companies out there, Deliv and Roadie, which is crowdsourcing more consumer to consumer. So Coyote's sort of taking the trucking piece and then the end-to-end piece. Roadie and Deliv are two spaces in there, and Deliv's model is, you know, shopping mall to home.
and then Rhodey is more of like a consumer-to-consumer space. So our strategic enterprise fund made investments at both of those companies for knowledge returns to understand what's going on in that space. If you see what Uber and Lyft has done to, the taxi industry, we need to understand what's going on in that space, and so we're definitely taking knowledge investments in there.
So with that, it's a few minutes before 1. I appreciate all of the insights from our panelists. And with that, and in keeping with the theme of disruption, we're going to break away from the norm and get you guys out a couple minutes early. So I'll call upon Brad Harmon to close out our program.
That was a great panel. That was very informative. Please join me again in giving a round of applause for our speakers and panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us here today. I hope everyone is going to take something away from this. I know I will. Please take a moment, if you would, to complete the online survey. The website is printed at the bottom of the flyers on each of your tables. Your feedback is welcome and it would be appreciated. You can also give feedback directly to Colin or me or any of the staff members at the Center of Innovation for Logistics. Again, thank you to our panelists, Pier 1, Stage Front, and the staff at the Savannah International Trade and Convention Center. And thank you again to Andrea Dove and Amy Vogelsang of Hunter McLean for all the effort they put forth, as well as Sandy Lake and Emily Butler at the Center of Innovation for Logistics. They all put a massive amount of effort into making this a reality. So I want to thank them, and especially I want to thank you for coming. We really enjoy sharing this information. We enjoy soliciting the information. So we hope to see you next year at the Savannah Logistics Lunch. Thank you.